Subaru, one of the Japanese automakers most trusted by Canadians, has ended the production of vehicles in the United States for the Canadian market. The reason is anything but unclear. It is the direct consequence of the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump. A policy promoted as a tool to bring manufacturing back to the United States has ultimately produced the opposite effect. Instead of keeping factories in place, it is pushing them farther away from US borders. And Subaru is merely the most visible symbol of a much broader trend now taking shape. Japan, a country long closely tied to Detroit through steel, engines, and automotive supply chains, is beginning to shift its focus. Rather than continuing to concentrate southward, it is now looking north, toward Canada. While Washington erects barriers and turns trade into an instrument of pressure, Ottawa is quietly building a different playing field, with new rules and an entirely different approach. The future of the automotive, energy, and technology sectors is no longer being shaped in the United States as it once was. It is being forged in Canada. The government of Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen not to wait for Washington to change course. Instead, it has proactively established new partnerships, more durable, more stable, and less exposed to risk. A new alliance has begun to emerge, and Japan's public strategic recalibration is the clearest confirmation of that shift. This is not a minor adjustment in bilateral trade. It is a profound restructuring of geopolitical and industrial relationships. At the very moment Carney appeared on the stage in Kuala Lumpur, the balance of global industry had already begun to tilt northward. When Trump imposed a 25% tariff on imported automobiles and metals, he promised a renaissance in manufacturing. He said jobs would return, that cars would once again be built on American soil. But reality tells a very different story. Instead of expanding investment in US plants, many automakers have begun to contemplate withdrawal. Subaru is the first to formalize that decision. The company has stopped producing vehicles in the United States for Canadian customers and shifted that activity back to Japan. The rationale is clear and grounded purely in economics. Steel and aluminum prices in the US have surged as a result of tariffs, rendering domestic production increasingly uncompetitive. In that context, importing fully assembled vehicles has become cheaper than assembling them in the United States. Subaru's announcement sent shockwaves through the entire industry. Workers who once built vehicles for the Canadian market now face uncertainty and an unpredictable future. While Washington continues to justify its policies, investors are seeing a deeper trend take shape. The United States is no longer as attractive a destination for manufacturing expansion as it once was. An increasing number of companies are now considering leaving. Trump's tariffs have produced a phenomenon many economists describe as reverse reshoring. Policies designed to rebuild domestic manufacturing are instead pushing industry offshore. The automotive sector, once the pride of America's post-war boom and industrial growth, has become a casualty of short-term political calculations. North of the border, Canada has taken a very different approach. Without fiery rhetoric or emotional reactions, Ottawa has remained calm and acted with deliberation. The Canadian government has quietly opened channels of dialogue with Japan, Malaysia, and China, gradually building new relationships. The strategy is straightforward. As the United States becomes entangled in internal and trade conflicts, Canada positions itself as a stable and reliable destination. Subaru's operational adjustment is neither an isolated nor a random case. It is part of a much broader wave. Toyota, Hyundai, and even the Chinese electric vehicle maker BYD have begun reassessing their strategic direction. The US market, once regarded as the global benchmark, now resembles a maze of overlapping tariffs and unpredictable regulatory changes. In Canada alone, Toyota's sales rose by as much as 29% in July. The reason was not flashy incentive packages, but stability. An open trade environment and a predictable style of leadership have given businesses the confidence to expand. Mark Carney's government has not offered sweeping subsidy promises. What it has committed to instead is a stable and consistent policy framework. For automakers worn down by tariffs and uncertainty, that stability is worth more than any short-term support. As a result, companies can plan 5 years ahead without worrying that a sudden tweet will wipe out their margins overnight. In contrast, Washington's confrontational, punitive mindset has made future planning nearly impossible for manufacturers. The consequences are clearly visible on both sides of the border. Many US factories have been forced to pause or scale back operations. Meanwhile, Canadian ports are bustling with ships carrying vehicles from Japan and South Korea. Models that were once assembled in Indiana are now built overseas and shipped directly into the Canadian market. This is not a coincidence. It is a deliberate wave of relocation. Investors have begun to describe this phenomenon as a northward shift. Each time the White House announces a new round of tariffs, Ottawa quietly signs another cooperation agreement. Yet most Americans scarcely notice. Many still believe this conflict is about protecting jobs, while in reality events are moving in an entirely different direction. At its core, the real question now is who will lead the next phase of industrial development. Mark Carney recognized that opportunity earlier than most leaders. While Donald Trump has turned trade into an instrument of pressure, Carney has chosen the opposite approach, treating trust as a strategic asset. He understands that in a world increasingly accustomed to volatility and insecurity, stability becomes a rare form of power. For that reason, the strategy is clear: to restore and reinforce Canada's image as a partner that can be relied upon over the long term. For months, he has steadily built trade corridors with Japan, Malaysia, and China. These efforts were never meant to generate loud headlines, but to lay the foundations for lasting stability. Carney understands that multinational corporations are not swayed by slogans or national symbols. What they seek is an environment that is predictable and allows for long-term planning. In closed-door discussions, Carney's team developed what economists now refer to as a doctrine of smart trade. This approach emphasizes clear rules, incentives for green manufacturing, and open digital borders. Each element is deliberately designed to attract industries looking for an exit from the growing uncertainty emanating from Washington. While Donald Trump continues to issue warnings of sweeping tariffs, Canada has quietly positioned itself as an alternative, more open, safer, and better aligned with the future. Mark Carney's approach is not about spectacle. There are no celebratory marches or dramatic midnight speeches, just a series of agreements signed quietly, step by step, until the model becomes clear and impossible to deny. Each time Washington closes a door, Ottawa opens another pathway. And when Japan began reassessing its automotive partnerships, Carney moved quickly. He did not lecture Tokyo about loyalty or alliance obligations. Instead, he put forward substantive proposals for cooperation, from data sharing to trade incentives tied to emissions reductions. This was diplomacy driven by expertise and long-term calculation, not by spectacle. Japan's adjustment, therefore, was not merely a business decision, it was a geopolitical signal. For decades, Japan's automotive industry revolved around US demand and the American market. But under the growing weight of tariffs imposed by Donald Trump, Tokyo reached a critical realization. Dependence on the United States was no longer an advantage, it had become a risk. As a result, Japan began restructuring its production networks around partners it could trust. And Canada emerged as the most suitable choice. The two countries quietly aligned within a new framework that prioritizes clean technology, open markets, and shared innovation. Subaru's decision was only the opening signal. An increasing number of Japanese automakers are now using Canadian ports as their gateway into North America, bypassing the United States entirely. With the government of Mark Carney reducing tariffs and simplifying cross-border regulations, this option quickly became economically sound. For Japan, Canada offers stable access to Western markets while avoiding chaos. For Canada, it presents an opportunity to assume a new role as a bridge between Asia and the West, a position Washington once held. Throughout this arrangement, the symbolic message is unmistakable. Japan is not turning its back on the United States, it is choosing prudence over loud declarations. And Canada is not seeking sympathy in trade, it has been given the chance to lead. What began as a strategy of self-protection has gradually evolved into a shift of global significance. The automotive industry is redrawing its own map, and more arrows are pointing straight north. When Mark Carney appeared in Kuala Lumpur to attend the ASEAN summit, most observers expected little more than the usual diplomatic pleasantries. Yet what unfolded on stage that day took many international leaders by surprise. Before delegations from Japan, Malaysia, China, and Indonesia, Carney did not deliver a hollow speech filled with vague commitments or familiar political slogans. Instead, he sent a message of strategic autonomy. In a calm tone and with clear reasoning, he looked directly into the camera and said that Canada would engage with the United States when it is ready. But Canada will not stand still and wait. That single concise sentence marked a clear shift. It was not merely a message directed at Washington. It was an assertion of leadership on the international stage. For decades, Canada had often been seen as America's quiet neighbor, following along and adapting to decisions made to the south. But at that moment, the balance had changed. Carney wanted to signal that Canada no longer needed anyone's approval to act in its own interests. And he demonstrated this not through grandiose declarations, but through the simple act of standing there and stating a new reality. Just hours after that speech, Ottawa swiftly finalized new trade cooperation frameworks with Japan, Malaysia, and China. Worth billions of dollars, these agreements focus on clean technology, artificial intelligence, and electric vehicle manufacturing. These were not symbolic gestures. They are the foundations of a new industrial order now taking shape. While the United States under Donald Trump retreats behind tariff walls and protectionist measures, Canada under Mark Carney has chosen to build partnerships capable of shaping the decade ahead. That message quickly reverberated across the Pacific region. Stability became the new measure of power, and Carney had just positioned Canada as a reliable anchor for the rest of the world. The media began calling this approach the Carney Doctrine. Economists described it as an Asian pivot. For many ordinary Canadians, however, the takeaway was far simpler: proof that quiet, steady strength can still prevail. Because while the United States remained preoccupied with posting threats on Twitter, Carney focused on signing agreements. As Washington fractured relationships, Ottawa patiently repaired and built them. And when the summit came to a close, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The world is no longer waiting for the United States to lead. Instead, it is beginning to follow the path that Canada has just opened. After the ASEAN summit concluded, Mark Carney's messages did not remain mere words. They were quickly translated into concrete action. Within just a few months, leading Japanese automakers began redirecting their shipping flows northward. Subaru, Toyota, and Mazda quietly restructured their logistics networks, routing vehicles through Canadian ports and bypassing the United States entirely. At the same time, BYD, China's largest electric vehicle manufacturer, announced the opening of new distribution centers in Quebec and British Columbia. And this was only the beginning. Canada is no longer serving merely as a consumer market within the global automotive industry. It is becoming a critical transit hub, a bridge directly linking factories in Asia to consumers across North America. Vancouver is gradually replacing Los Angeles as the preferred port of entry for imported electric vehicles. Montreal is also emerging as a new center for clean battery technology and its associated value chains. In Ontario, Japanese investment has reached into the billions of dollars, flowing into advanced manufacturing facilities with the expectation of creating high-quality jobs and driving green innovation. While Washington remains mired in tariff disputes and short-term political calculations, Ottawa has focused on delivering what businesses need most: clarity and consistency. The Carney government has streamlined customs procedures, secured tax incentives for sustainable energy, and widened the door to cross-border research collaboration. Manufacturers that once viewed North America as a complex logistical puzzle now see Canada as a stable platform for market access. With every vehicle leaving a Japanese port, the new route becomes clearer, and it runs through Canada. That means jobs for Canadian workers, growth for Canadian cities, and a clear affirmation of the long-term vision Carney has pursued. South of the border, the picture looks entirely different. Many U.S. factories have been forced to suspend operations or run at minimal capacity under pressure from erratic tariffs and weakening market demand. The slogan "America First" has gradually morphed into an America turning inward. By contrast, the phrase "Made in Canada" is gaining growing value and credibility in global markets. Mark Carney has not merely been signing trade agreements, he has redrawn the entire industrial map. Canada is now viewed as a stable and reliable gateway linking Asia with the West. And as other economies adapt to this new reality, it is becoming increasingly clear that the road to the future no longer runs through Detroit. That route now passes through Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. While Canada is busy welcoming new factories and partners, the United States is struggling under the weight of its own policies. General Motors reported losses exceeding $1.1 billion in a single quarter. Stellantis also recorded losses of roughly $350 million over just 6 months. These are not short-term cyclical setbacks. They reflect increasingly visible cracks in the foundations of the American automotive industry. Tariffs, once promoted as a cure for reviving manufacturing, have instead backfired, tightening the squeeze on the very companies they were meant to protect. Rising steel and aluminum prices have left automakers struggling to cope. Components have become more expensive, export routes disrupted, and investment capital has begun flowing toward more stable markets, such as Canada. This crisis is not confined to corporate boardrooms. In cities like Chicago,